Thank you, Joe, and I'll try and make sure the chairs are safe so that we won't go off with any of them afterwards. Good morning and welcome to 2 days of intensive discussion on unlocking prosperity. Now, I hope that unlocking prosperity gets your attention, because I can assure you it's getting the attention of thousands of destinations all around the world. And while we're in Derry and talking about Derry, be aware that many hundreds and thousands of these are already proceeding, are already funded, are already implementing some of the things we're going to talk about today. Now, when we're talking about unlocking the value, we're talking about looking at the new ways, or better ways, or smart ways that we can unlock some of this extra value. And while there's an emphasis today at the sessions today about the old city, the things that we're going to talk about in terms of solutions and in terms of challenges are things which have application really for everybody. I'd like to thank Stephanie and the other speakers. They bring enormous experience to bear here, so that at the end of the sessions we'll be fully informed about international best practice and about their experience in other environments. And this will help us when we come to shape something which is customized and which is special for Derry. Now, Stephanie made 3 points which I think are important. The first is that we're in this period of millennial change. I sort of characterize it as being irresistible, tectonic, disruptive, and is driven by these people who are going to be the majority of the population within a decade. And they think differently, they act differently, they expect differently. Now, this is a transforming change. It's not change like we used to know it. This is transforming, it's irresistible, and Derry must react to it the same as everybody else with insightful skill. The second point she made is that there's a growing number of cities who, following what was good practice in the 1970s and 1980s, implemented some policies which are now shown over time not to have been based on sound ideas. And they're now reversing these in order to produce the success that we're looking for in terms of urban vitality. And the third thing she said, which I think is universal and which all the speakers will bear out, and that is that heritage and culture are seen now globally as critical factors in terms of the future of any destination that we're talking about. Their contribution which they can make to the economic and social life of the city, we're going to talk a lot about that, but they also make terrific contributions to societal and lifestyle activities which are vital for the cities of the 21st century. So today, let us look deeply at some of these problems, but at the very beginning, let me appeal to you not to become involved in any of the things that could disrupt our attention. That is, to try and apportion blame for what has happened in the past, to try and vent any frustrations that we naturally feel that things aren't moving fast enough, and also not to accept any expedient solutions. These things need to be thought about, they need to be agreed, they need to be debated, and so forth. And it's very necessary it's very necessary at all these times that Derry, like every place else, should look in the mirror every now and again, because that's what we're primarily doing. We're looking to see how prepared Derry is to take on some of these challenges which are up ahead. And I always advocate that any look in the mirror should be ruthless, because if it isn't ruthless, we'll ignore some of the problems that we need to cope with. I join with Stephanie and others in thanking all of the people here who come together with the Inner City Preservation Trust to make this conference successful, and I congratulate them in bringing together such experienced speakers that will be speaking to you afterwards. And what they have in common is they're all passionate about Derry. They want Derry to succeed. They know Derry, and their inputs will certainly help us to succeed better. I'd like to give a big shout out also for Kieran Murray. Despite his new parental duties, he's managed to host an engaging conversation on social media. And anybody who wishes to look at that will see that there's a great interest by the people of Derry in the city It's predominantly a positive interest. They want you to take on the challenges that are there, and they want Derry to succeed, and they believe that now the time is right. Now, today and tomorrow, we're going to be challenged to put on our thinking caps and think about the future. And I recall the words of George Bernard Shaw saying that thinking is the hardest work, which is why it is probable reason that so few people engage in it. So I hope that we're going to engage in it now in Derry, because I think it helps significantly if we take the time out to actually think deeply about the most important thing for us and our families, which is the future. Now, there are very serious challenges out there. You don't need me to tell you that, but there's also serious good news. And the good news is that in the global look at what constitutes the new wealth, heritage and culture now rates up in the very top group, because people can now see the contribution that heritage and culture can make to our society. And the second thing is that tourism is now back and growing very solidly. It's the third largest global industry by turnover, by expenditure, as well as the taxation it contributes to government, and as well as the employment it generates and the impact it makes on local economies. That's worth bearing in mind when one is looking at the options that are facing any destination, and particularly Derry, where tourism is such a strong option. What it means when tourism is strong is there's going to be no shortage of customers. So we can't blame the market anymore, but nevertheless, it's up to the destination itself to become a winner in those circumstances. Now, our sights at this conference are on nothing less than creating Derry as a distinctive heritage destination with the strength and depth in terms of its contribution that it can make to the future economy. It wants to be a pillar of that economy. And that's good news, I think, for everyone. And it leads me to ask the question, why can't Derry position itself as the most successful heritage destination on the island of Ireland? I do think it has all the attributes to do that. I first visited Derry over half a century ago. It wowed me then. I was only a boy, but standing on the walls, looking at the strength of the walls, I felt engaged in the city just by being there. And Derry continues to wow me and show signs of its flashes of its brilliance, as it did during the City of Culture. And given the strength of its assets, and given all these attributes which it has, it's my view that it can make a far larger impact in terms of the economic prosperity that tourism, heritage, culture can actually deliver to Derry and its people. I recognise that the level of street life which is currently visible in the old city is a particular problem that cannot be ignored, because if it is ignored, I think it will pose a strategic challenge to Derry achieving all that I believe that it can achieve. There's nothing wrong with Derry, in my view, that can't be cured by what is right with Derry and the capability and the resourcefulness of its people and its organisations to fix and improve and enhance their city. The city that the history that shaped Derry has at times been turbulent, but now that is all part of the history itself. Intense change signals a lot of uncertainty. People are always uncertain when the future is changed, but it also brings to light some truths which everybody has to grasp at the beginning of the process. And the first of those truths is that the burden of change and the nature of change lies squarely on the shoulders of the Derry team. There's nobody else going to come and do this. It's got to be done by the people of Derry. The second thing is there's no silver bullets, and worse still, there's no resting places on the road to success. This is hard, grinding work which has to be taken on. We need much better joined-up thinking, integrated working together. That's the way forward. And we have to realize that modern cities are dynamics which need continual management. They're never going to reach a stage where we can say that the work is finished. But when we join together all the energies that are available in the community and the society and in the city into enduring partnerships, we greatly improve the possibilities of us all achieving success. It's good, therefore, at the outset of the conference to agree that Derry has to win its future. It has to create its own prosperity in its own unique way. It's not going to be delivered by anyone but the Derry team. Now, financial assistance will be available, but Derry must invest in the partnerships and in the processes and in the structures, and it must have its business cases and proposals shovel-ready at all times. In my opinion, challenges do not close doors, they open doors, but they open the door to the challenge so that we have to take ownership of what lies beyond the challenge on the other side of the opportunity. A strategy without challenges is a strategy without ambition, so I advocate for Derry to be ambitious in what it sets out to do. And when I look dispassionately at Derry, I see a city where intentions are good, desire is strong, but I think action needs to be further reinforced and integrated through strengthened partnerships. And these robust partnerships, which I'm a big advocate of, they must recognize a number of things. They must recognize that there's a huge legacy here of heritage and culture, and while it comes from a turbulent past, it is actually one of the most critical assets for the future development of the city. It must also recognize that tourism is the major global growth industry that is ready to go in Derry. Derry has all the attributes that are needed and has a good foothold in that industry. It must recognize that the uniqueness of the walled city is a magnet, and this magnet can play a much larger part in terms of delivering the prosperity and the positive image of the city of Derry. It must also recognize that we're not going to do all of these things that need to be done using the methods that we're using at present or the methods we have used in the past. We are, in my view, going to need dramatic changes, and these must be implemented if they're going to support the ambition. I must recognize that the suburban and peripheral development, which was carried out in the past, does have some unavoidable negative effects. And these are now being questioned, as Stephanie has shown, because of their distorting value after a certain time when they're considered in the broader urban context. Now, the heritage and natural assets of Derry are remarkable. They're very deep. They're wonderful in terms of how attractiveness can be built for future tourism. But the demands of the external market is that these must now be reimagined, reinvested in terms of the visitor experience. The walls are unique, they're a powerful magnet, there are major challenges, and these major challenges involve increasing the dwell time that visitors spend in Derry, facilitating better distribution to all of the attractions that you have within the city, encouraging people to stay longer and spend more money. And I expect that these challenges will unlock a huge interest in the discussions that you're going to have afterwards in the workshops. It's relatively easy for me to say what is the state of the art in terms of the visitor experience. It's very simply put as multi-level entry, multi-sensory experience, and multi-emotional engagement. That's it in a sentence. But believe you me, this is a very, very challenging mission that Derry must engage with in order to make this heritage and culture come alive, become more engaging, become more attractive to the modern millennium visitors who are going to be the dominant force in the marketplace, as I said, very shortly. I advocate that Derry's ambition should be as high as possible, and it should become the best heritage experience on the island of Ireland. And I firmly believe, from my knowledge of the city, that that is perfectly attainable. Now, tourism is a major growth sector, and it has very high economic and social impacts. I welcome the fact that Derry has taken a very positive step in positioning itself as the premier base destination in the area between the Causeway Coast and the Wild Atlantic Way. This is very good strategy, but it only works if Derry now moves on and takes ownership of that space. It must drive on, and it must become the dominant town in that position within the tourism and marketing map of Ireland. I welcome the fact that local tourism has boosted its performance and there is success to report, and I advocate for a higher ambition which can only be taken on effectively by the adoption of an accelerated growth strategy. The immediate top targets for improvement in tourism, as Odrin will know, are increasing overnight visitors who stay here, expenditure into the marketplace, and better distribution among all the businesses and attractions that make up Derry. There'll be no shortage of customers, as I said, but there'll still be winners and losers, because now it's down to the local destinations in terms of the strategy that they put in the market. I'm one of the supporters of the proposition which I've heard mentioned. I think it would be a very good move for the Tourist Information and Visit Derry office to move into the walled city. I think this would be something which would give a positive economic impact as well as some social benefits. And a critical element of that change, if it does take place, will be the positioning of the coach car park. And here again, my view is that the coach car park must follow, and that if traffic can be curtailed in terms of the traffic that's going through the inner city, then, in my view, looking at the Dublin situation, there is more than sufficient space on some of the streets, like Bishop Street, where coach parking can be allowed, and this will give a much better distribution of visitors to the other attractions within the city. I hope this is something that can be undertaken. It doesn't seem to have a high cost. It does seem to have a considerable economic benefit in the short term. Partnerships do exist in tourism, as exemplified by Visit Derry. However, the challenges ahead require that these partnerships must be more formally established, they must be more clearly tasked, and they must be more active in the joint actions to be agreed and planned and implemented together here in Derry. In a perfect tourism destination response, the private sector and the public sector work hand in glove. That is the way, and that is the best way to progress. And I do believe that Derry is ripe for the intensification of this type of ideas. Derry does need further capital expenditure, particularly in the accommodation base and the diversity of that base, and it does need that with immediate effect. And the critical strategic element in building prosperity, and this must come mainly from the private sector. Private sector always looks at the risk, and now that as I've said, there's going to be no shortage of visitors, success is going to depend on marketing. So I think if commitments can be made to long-term, high-quality, targeted marketing, then I think the private sector will come across and back what essentially is a winning strategy. Government are constantly seeking to optimise the impacts and outcomes that they get from the funds that they allocate. And I'm making a very special appeal to tourism, because I don't see enough of this, that they should communicate their principal targets in the language of the economy and in the language of progress. They should talk about money into the local economy. They should talk about contributions to taxation revenue. They should talk about jobs created. They should talk about local economy sector supported. They should talk about local problems impacted on. And if they do that, they will be demonstrating to the people who give the money that this industry is more than capable of responding and delivering what we claim tourism can do. There's every reason for the city to be bullish about its tourism, but only if it's continued to be invested in and curated as the destination that it needs to be. Now, the unique walled city, the old city, is the primary asset. It's not a news, as I saw in Edward's earlier thing. It's an absolute asset for the future. It must be the beating heart of a successful Derry destination. It needs proactive policy supports, incentives, and new investment solutions. And it deserves those because of the role it can play. It must be the heart of the beating heart of the Derry destination, and it's quite impossible for me to imagine that Derry can be successful and thrive without the old city being the thriving heart. Now, successful cities are suffering successful city centres, I should say, are suffering many new problems, including what we call space equity. And that challenge is leading to a massive change in terms of the space that is occupied by retail. And we can see that there's a transition from commercial activity to social and community activity. The new challenge that we have in all the city centres is to rebalance the multiple uses that are there, to use them effectively and to add new elements to them. I believe that the walled city precinct, that there's a very significant problem there in terms of energising and boosting the footfall there, and particularly in terms of night economy, which I'm sure will be covered well in terms of what we'll say in the other sessions. You have many ideas, I'm sure, that you're going to get a chance to unveil during the thing, and I have a few myself, and I'd like to mention some of them now. The first thing to understand is that while am I going? Have I got space? Sorry, I went wrong with the slides there for a moment. The first thing to realise is that people are the sole creators of urban life and vitality. So any move to up the vitality of the inner city must also look at revitalisation plans which have got to do with getting people back to live, not just Joe who's born in the inner city, but to get residential, hotels, all forms of accommodation that can be housed back into the inner city. And in bringing back housing and accommodation, we must also look at the environment in which they're in, because as Stephanie has shown there, if traffic is reduced, this provides much more engaging, safe spaces, because human beings are, after all, social primates, and there's nothing we like better than meeting our friends in town and meeting up with them, whether by arrangement or by accident, and engaging with a safe environment in town. The evidence is everywhere now that traffic reduction does help to create a better environment. So we must recognise that all the evidence is that congestion constrains demand and the elimination of congestion boosts it. So I think Derry must look now carefully at this, and this has already been aired by some people who have sent in ideas, and it's obvious that people are beginning to see sense in this approach. I look at Belfast and I see the success of the Cathedral Quarter, and it seems to me that there's another opportunity for a Cathedral Quarter around the Bishop Street area of Derry. And I particularly look at what could be done with the airspace that is immediately above the large car park there. I think the car park is going to be needed. It'd be very frustrating to take it away, but you have all this space overhead. I think that's ripe for a public-private sector partnership type idea, and I believe that it will give special things to the city without taking anything away other than some airspace. I would ask you and appeal to you to avoid the bland in everything. The bland is out. It's of zero interest to any group anymore. It's dead and buried by the millennial generation, probably never to return. Everything that you do now in the public realm, in the city, it needs to have a significance beyond itself. Now, that's a big question that's opened up and be taken, I'm sure, in some of the other sessions. And the final suggestion is obviously something that Derry's already doing, and that is to create and foster events, but to make sure that the networks are there that can support getting the information out as to how to participate in these events and how to enjoy them. Now, I have to say a word about retail, which is operating in a very highly contested space right now. And I'm sure if there are any retailers here among us, they're looking to the future. I think this is one of the areas where the millennial disruptor preference for digital and convenience shopping has really changed the whole landscape of retail. We can now confirm that the types of retail that are going to survive are going to be experiential retail, and we hope destination retail can also survive, provided the owners and traders make a step-up change in how they communicate and how they liaise and what they offer in terms of their customers. It's got to the stage now where people need a real reason for going to a shop and spending money. And hopefully where that is provided, success will attend. Now, modern best practice for effective public action now requires a platform embracing new forms of robust, action-orientated partnerships. I talk about the partnership mindset. Whenever you get a challenge, I've got a challenge, the first question that should occur to you is, who can help me with this challenge, and reach out and bring these people together in partnerships. I see this happening all over the world in successful destinations, but these new partnerships must establish new ground rules that are designed to harness all the available energies. A lot of people interpret these partnerships as extra meetings, and they fall apart very quickly because nothing is agreed collectively, nothing is actioned collectively, and the real partnerships need these new ground rules in order to progress. Development has consequences, and a lot of these consequences we now refer to as unintended consequences. Urban lifestyle is going to be the dominant lifestyle of the 21st century, there's no doubt about that, and that's going to result in every city having to refit and change virtually everything to comply with the Generation Y and Generation Z requirements, because they're going to reach population dominancy, they're going to do this, they're going to expect this. And as cities develop rapidly, it's very clear that some actions that they took in the past have resulted in negatives in the current situation, and particularly looking to the future. The walled city itself is very precious. It really can't be left to market forces in order to decide its future. It does need protection. It does need to be the beating heart of the overall destination, and it does need some special policy and incentives in order to survive and survive well. In coming to a conclusion, I suppose I'm reflecting on the news that we get every day about the huge problems that the world is having, and which of these is dominant. You know, is it global warming? Is it the poverty? Is it the litter that we're producing, etc.? I'd like to say that I agree that strongly with Dr. Edward de Bono. The greatest threat to our society is the poor quality of our thinking. Edward has shown in his work that too many examples of where our impaired inability to think, to agree, to plan, to implement, to work together in an integrated way have resulted in a lot of the problems that are now before us today. This is seldom, if ever, mentioned, and unfortunately, it still leaves us today grappling with many of these problems that are coming out of policy decisions or decisions that were taken in the past. And they're very difficult to solve, and some of them are even worse than the problems we set out to solve in the first place. Now, Derry, as we know it today, is the sum of all the generational choices that have been made by the people that have gone before us. And that's true, even if you have participated or if you've said nothing. I call it the urban paradox. Your place shapes you, and therefore you should shape your place. It's very easy to exclude yourself from shaping your place, but you cannot exclude yourself from the consequences that take place when the place is shaped by others. This conference extends an invitation and a means of getting positively involved in that. Now, the strength of the leaders and the people of Derry to act on their conviction and deepen their resolve and determination to succeed, that will always be the primary determinant of the success of Derry now and in the future. A city which takes action now to reimagine its future can create a very powerful movement. And I believe that now is the time to gather the partnerships, the consensus, and the people that can overcome the barriers ahead and invest the energy and ideas that are needed to ensure the success of Derry. I'm asking you to make your passion for Derry help to inject the necessary momentum, pace, and acceleration so as to fulfill the words of Seamus Heaney in a slightly different way, because I've taken the liberty of recasting his inspiring words as follows: "Only the tidal wave of your actions will make hope and history rhyme in Derry." So let's get together and accelerate Derry's success. Thank you very much.